Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 140 for the 10th of Nissan in a leap year. So before I started running my own business, I had a lot of different jobs. And one of the jobs which I had was actually to be a gym teacher at Beis Rivka. And this was actually probably one of the most difficult jobs that I ever had. I taught gym to grades 5 through 8, and it was really, really difficult. Not because putting together the curriculum was so difficult or anything like that, but what was really difficult about it was merely just getting the girls to pay attention. Getting them to even getting through like roll call was really difficult. Getting them to stand in a straight line, getting them to follow any of my instructions, it was really, really tough. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why it was so difficult is because I was new to teaching. I hadn't really taught this age group before, especially not in like a school setting. And so I was not so familiar with how things need to go in order to make everything run smoothly. So I made the grave mistake on day one of teaching of being too nice. So I came in with a big smile on my face. I was really nice to all the girls. I gave them personal attention. I was really warm. Big mistake. Because as I learned, and as many teachers told me afterwards, this is the exact opposite of what you need to do. You need to come in on the first day being really strong, being really cold, not smiling at all, and that's the way that you can gain their respect. Only in that way will they come and listen to you. And later, once you've earned their respect, they have that fear instilled within them of you, then later, as time goes on, you can start to show them a little bit more of a warmer side. You can start to loosen up a little bit. You can begin to smile and become friendly. But if you do that right in the beginning, then they will think of you more as a friend rather than a teacher, and they won't respect you and they will rule over you, which is really sadly what I learned. Eventually, long story short, I did eventually gain somewhat of their respect back. I was able to retroactively learn how to be a little bit tougher and a little bit meaner to them and things like that. And it actually did work. And I did end up being able to control the class, but that's a subject for another time. So why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about my experience teaching gym at Beis Rivka? Because it really relates to what we're going to be learning about today. So we're learning a new chapter in Likutei Amarim today, chapter 41. And the subject of today's episode is exactly this idea that while we've been talking a lot about loving God and fearing God and how both of these are really, really essential if we want to have the optimal type of service of God, if we want our service to really become elevated to the higher realms, we need to start with fear, interestingly enough. And this might seem somewhat counterintuitive because it might seem like the main goal, like when we think about really serving God in a real way, it might involve a lot of love and connecting to God in this really loving way. But what we'll learn about today is that it actually has to start with fear, or another way to translate is awe. So the word for fear or awe in Hebrew is yira, which is actually related as a side note to the word for seeing, interestingly enough. And the terms fear and awe, they're sort of used interchangeably because they are related, and there are also different levels of this yira. So this is where the English translation can kind of be a little bit tricky, because when we think of fear and when we think of awe, they can like kind of connote very different things. So let's get straight into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains this, and then maybe we can chat a little bit more at the end and bring it back into my gym teaching analogy. So the Alter Rebbe says that, however, a person must always keep in mind and remember what is the beginning of service and its main thing and its root. Like, what is the main aspect of service? And that even though we know that that yira, that again fear or awe, is the root for moving away from evil, like staying away from doing things that God doesn't want us to do, and love is the root of asetov, of doing things, of the positive commandments. Nevertheless, it's not enough to just arouse love on its own for doing those things that in order to propel us to do the asetov, the positive commandments. But rather, at bare minimum, we need to first arouse our innate fear, which is found in the inner recesses of our heart, of the heart of every Jew, so as not to rebel against the King of all kings, namely God, as we talked about above. And we need to arouse this fear so that it becomes revealed in our heart, or in our minds at least. So again, this is referencing to something we learned a few episodes ago about this idea that either when we serve God, we can either tap into this more innate love and fear that we have, which will lead to an intellectual kind of like recognition that we need to serve God, or we can come to start with the intellect and come to an intellectual understanding of God through intellectual contemplation and meditation, which will lead to this deeper feeling of passion within our hearts. And so we talked about that in relation to love and fear of God. So here we're specifically talking about the fear of God and how this applies to the fear of God. So again, so in the fear of God, there's the level of having it be being revealed in our hearts, which comes from that more intellectual contemplation and meditation, or where it just becomes revealed in the mind. So we don't have this passionate fear of God, but we do have this like understanding that we need to fear God, and that comes from tapping into our innate fear of God. And that's kind of like the bare minimum of what we need. And this will lead us to have like this like understanding in our thoughts about the greatness of God and about God's kingship, how God is the king of all the worlds, whether it's the higher realms or the lower realms, and God fills all the realms and God surrounds all the realms. In Hebrew, the terms for this is memale kol almin and soviv kol almin. These are two terms that come up a lot in Chassidus. We'll definitely talk about them more as we get further into Tanya. As is written, and here the Alter Rebbe cites Yirmiyahu chapter 23, verse 24, where it says, Halo et hashamayim v'et haaretz enei maleh, meaning, do I not fill the heaven and the earth? So meaning to say that, again, alluding to this fact that God is everywhere, he's in the heavens and in the earth. And nevertheless, so this great God, which fills the entirety of heaven and earth, he leaves aside the supernal realms as well as the lower realms. And instead, he comes and he connects his kingship to his nation, Israel. And not only to his nation Israel in a general sense, but to you, to every single individual. And this is why every single person needs to say that for me, the world was created. And is a citation from the Mishnah Sanhedrin, from chapter 4, Mishnah 5 of Sanhedrin, which says, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, for me, the world was created. So every person needs to really see it as if the entire world was created for them, and to see God in this really personal way, and to receive upon themselves the yoke of heaven, to see that God is their individual king, and to serve God and to do God's will in all different types of service, like the service of a servant. So this is the end of that section. So again, so just to recap, so the focus today is really on this idea of fear, and starting with fear. So just like going back to my students at Beis Rivka, the basis of respecting a teacher, the basis of any kind of discipline of any kind, there needs to be that fear as the basis. Sure, the love is important and necessary too. That comes later on. Step one is fear. So this is really what we're talking about here, is in terms of our service of God, is to really figure out how to cultivate that fear. Ideally, it should be this like passionate kind of fear that comes through intellectual contemplation and meditation. But if we can't get to that level, at least we should tap into that more innate kind of fear that we have, which will allow us to have this more like intellectual, like acceptance that we need to serve God. And we really need to get to this point where whatever level we're at, we have this like awareness of God and of God's kingship in the world. Like realize that God is the king. God is the ruler of the universe. And to not just see this in like a general way that like God is like everybody's God and is just the king of the world and that kind of thing. But we have to make it really make it personal and see it as if the entire world was really created for you, for me, for you, for each one of us. Like to really see it in a personal way that God is my personal God and he is my ruler. And when we have this awareness, this will lead us to really be able to serve God properly. So that's it for today. And we'll continue along these lines tomorrow when we continue with this chapter. And I'll speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.